Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Stoic Mom, who is a life coach and the mother of a trans-identified daughter. In this conversation, we talk about her journey along with her daughter through the forests, through the rivers, forests, and mountains of gender, as well as we talk about attachment and grief and liberalism and mothering and parenting and a wide variety of topics around family and relationship. I find Stoic Mom to be a wonderful guest, and if you agree with me about her wonderfulness, do check out her work, which is linked in the description. She does a lot of essays on Substack, as well as offering coaching services for parents of all types. So without further ado, here is Stoic Mom. Time is weird. We should just go to one universal time.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I don't know.
That would take some doing, I would think.
It would take like some sort of like
or
an alien invasion, something that brings the world together, you know?
Right. Yes. You would think some of the things that have been happening would have brought the world together by now.
Not quite the
But
comet
maybe.
that we're expecting, but maybe.
Right. Maybe that time is coming soon.
Are you praying for it every day? God,
I'm
give us an
optimistic.
ultimatum.
I'm optimistic.
Okay.
You know, I am. Thank goodness. I don't know how I'd be doing if I wasn't, you know, does that make sense? Like,
Well,
I'm
like
optimistic.
optimistic on like what level? Like eventually humanity is going to solve all its problems through technology? Optimistic? Or?
No, I would say optimistic and that we're going to maybe get better at integrating left brain, right brain.
Oh,
And
okay.
yes, be able to show up a little differently. It seems like there are lots of airplanes right now in my world. Are you hearing them? Okay. Okay. Good. Good.
Is your husband like flying his little drones around your house?
No, he doesn't have any drones.
Oh, okay.
He'd probably like to have drones though.
That you
but he
know
doesn't.
of.
This is true. This is true. This is pretty weird for me,
Is
but
it?
also not weird because I've heard your voice so often, you know.
Yeah.
I will admit I haven't been listening much lately. I haven't been very plugged into the gender content or
Yeah.
even the wars, even the culture wars. You know, I'm just not.
What are you doing? Like gardening?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Gardening, mindfulness, you know, and
Was that just staring at a wall?
no, it's being present. It's not time traveling. You know, it's not hanging out in the past, beating myself up, or, you know, hanging out in the future, terrified of, you know, certain outcomes that I don't have a lot of control over. So just paying attention. That sort of neutral observer idea, you know, that comes out of meditation and mindfulness. And yeah,
Huh.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think, how I'm able to stay sane in the madness. Yeah.
What prompted you to stop fighting, stop time traveling? Like, was it just things came to a head for you? Or?
Yeah, I would say it was a slow process. What I was doing wasn't working. You know, I could feel the stress in my body all the time. And
Yeah.
I was losing my mind a bit. It just got to be unsustainable. I had to figure something else out. And it was kind of figuring out how to walk my talk, if that makes sense. Like,
Okay. What was your talk?
well, I'm a certified life coach and have been
Oh.
since 2014. Yes.
Okay.
Before that, I was a classroom educator in elementary school.
Okay. So you're a
Um,
wise person. and a gracious
Well,
authority.
I think I'm an intelligent person,
Okay.
but it was all up in my head and not in my body, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I could talk pretty, but I wasn't necessarily living it.
Hmm.
And so I know I ruffle some feathers when I say I'm grateful for this experience with my daughter because of that, because it demanded that I walk my talk, right?
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
I had to embody the things I was saying and didn't
Give
realize that I wasn't even,
What's an
you know.
example of the things you were saying?
Um, you can't control other people, only how you respond. You can't control external circumstances, just how you respond to them. And here I was trying to control my daughter. So I just had to figure out how to show up differently and not, sorry. I, I needed to start paying attention to how I was reacting to her, right? I wanted to be responsive, not reactive. I had to figure out why these conversations with her could always trigger me. I could go into a conversation determined not to get triggered, and it seemed to happen every time. And so I know that's not really an example of walking my talk, but
Well,
I was personal responsibility is definitely one of my values. And so taking personal responsibility for my experience is what I needed to model for her.
yeah.
Yeah. It was recognizing that she was a very clear reflection of all the things about myself that needed healing.
Okay.
So I was using, we're jumping right in. I didn't mean
We
to.
do that in this channel.
Yes, we do. I have noticed that. I thought we'd lead up to this a little bit. um, yeah, I could. It was a combination of things. What I'm doing isn't working, right? Paying attention to what I'm modeling for my kid and giving her an example of womanhood that maybe might be attractive for her, because that was another component of this to me. And
Yeah.
something that I see is happening across the board is we've got a generation who is afraid to grow up. I think that we have made adulthood look very unattractive.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of motivation. There's not a lot of incentive to participate like a responsible adult, engaged in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've made it look really scary. And so I wanted to model adulthood in a way that might be more attractive. And I was a wreck. Right? So,
Hmm.
you know, as this was kind of piled on some other things. And I just don't think I was making it look very fun.
Yeah.
And so I set about to change that. And that's, kind of where Stoic Mom comes from, is I really like the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, instead of why is this happening to me and to my
Yeah.
family, changing the question and making it about what can I learn from this? How can I grow and be a better version of me through this experience?
When did it start and why? Gender, of all the things.
With my kid?
Yeah, with your kid.
Um, Honestly, at this point, I'd say, why not gender? I mean, it's a strategy, is how I see it. So it started. It depends on who you ask. Um, it started for me in 2018, but if you ask her, it started for her probably a couple years prior to that. And like most of these kids, she discovered it online. But I've got a precocious girl who um, had been sailing through childhood, had a very, you know, easy time in school, not super invested, but it also wasn't super hard, right?
Yeah.
And so
What about
it just, oh, she was
socially?
great. She was great. She was a very confident kid, very outgoing, had a pretty solid friend group.
Hmm.
Um, Middle school started to get hard, like it does for most kids these days. Middle school is difficult. In the school we were in, which is where I taught, we were both founding members of this charter school. It was an IB charter school. And I was one of the founding teachers, and she was one of the founding first graders in that school. And so very much identified with the culture of the school, which was a bit weird. And, you know,
Yeah. But you guys were kind of pod mother, kind
pod.
of pretty tight. Like you're in a pod.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
if
That's
she's
another
going to the
piece
school
of
you're
this.
teaching at, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I totally think, at least the moms that find their way to me, there's a certain level of enmeshment. And I'd love to talk
Enmeshment.
about
Yeah.
enmeshment. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Were
Yeah.
were you aware of that quality of your relationship with your daughter, or was it just what it was?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I've been very intentional in relationship. That's my philosophy as an educator and a parent is relationship is key, right? So that was always my
What does that
MO
mean?
is well, as far
Going
as
on walks, telling jokes to each other, dishing on all the gossip
yeah,
of the
having ways
day?
to connect, just
Okay.
shared interests and I at that point I wouldn't have known some of the terminology I would use today when it comes to attachment. Um, but collecting her regularly as far as just having shared interests and
Yeah.
dinner at the table and family things that we did together, just intentional in the relationship aspect of it, knowing that come adolescence it was going to be the relationship that would make adolescence more doable.
Yeah.
Right.
Little did you know.
Right, exactly. I mean, who could have foreseen this? And yeah, and so I mean, I think gender isn't that dissimilar of a strategy as some of the other things out there right now that kids identify with.
Okay.
I think it fits right in with like some of the diagnoses that they seek. It's
Strategy
just
for what? Self declaration, actualization,
yeah,
or manipulation
individuation,
of.
identity,
Okay.
exploration, right? These normal adolescent things.
Yeah.
I think they've got to figure out who they are in the world. That's what they do at this age. It's very developmentally appropriate. And so they're going to use the strategies of the day. And this is one of them. I mean,
Yeah.
I assert often that the kids aren't doing anything weird. It's the grown-ups.
Well, yeah. Just go downtown this month.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the adolescents are doing adolescent things. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're trying to figure out who they are in the world. And this is one strategy. It's a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think we give it too much power. And I did. I
Okay.
gave it too much power.
Okay.
Yes.
So a male identity for your daughter, could it have been a way to differentiate herself from you?
Yes. Yes. That would be part of it. That would be one need that the strategy fulfills.
Okay. So there's a lot of different
Fulfills
things.
many.
So,
Yes.
okay. So 2016, 2018. So 2016, how old is she?
She would have been in sixth grade. And
Okay.
she says she discovered it. And she figured this out about herself in fifth
Oh,
grade.
okay. So 11 and 12.
Yeah. 10, 11.
And was it like, Was it a sexuality identity? Like, oh, I'm bi, I'm lesbian. Kids are like really obsessed with that right now. Before they even have like actual desire, like they're already identifying into that. Or was the gender thing kind of uh,
I think this is
erotic
part of
or,
the this
yeah.
is another strategy, right? This is another need that is filled with this strategy. Is I think it's a way to opt out of sexuality,
Okay. Yeah.
at least for my kid. Maybe not all of them, but for mine,
Okay.
this was a way I think to just not even touch that. Like she wasn't ready to see herself as a sexual being, and I
Yeah.
think this gave her a way to not do that.
Okay. Yeah.
Avoid romantic type relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you notice? I mean, it's kind of all tied up in adolescence, so she's changing pretty rapidly, 11, 12, 13, right? So,
Yeah. And school is getting trickier. And this is something too that I think is important kind of about who I am as and how I approach this and other things with my kids. I do think I have a pretty different value set than a lot of people. I had left teaching before she hit middle school and have some pretty strong opinions about our education system.
oh,
And so was very open to doing something different when middle school was what it was, right? Because it was making her sick.
okay.
She was very stressed. And I
Why
personally,
the
I think
course loads or the social
it
aspect
was
or
a
what?
big leap, between especially in the school where we were, the elementary and middle school were very different. And
Okay.
so it really was a huge leap to go from fifth grade into sixth grade where the expectations were very different. And
Yeah.
she just wasn't from my perspective, I would say she wasn't super interested in the content, but she suddenly cared what her teachers thought, right? And so this created a lot of stress for her because she didn't really want to do the content, but she didn't want to disappoint her teachers who all knew me, right? I think there was extra pressure on everybody there for her
Yeah.
to perform, and she just wasn't really into it, and this was difficult for her father too, who very much values the system, and so there's a little bit of conflict going on there too in the home, with there was just a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so, that brings up I think another aspect of this that I have a lot of curiosity around, and I and that is the sensitivity of this cohort of kids that find this really attractive. I think personally, my hypothesis here, and I'm not an attachment expert. I'm just somebody who finds that framework really interesting as I'm trying to make sense of the human experience. Right, I'm just obsessed with the human experience.
Okay.
So I'm always just trying to make sense of things.
Yeah.
But I think we've raised, that enmeshment I talked about earlier, that sort of focus on relationship. I think we've raised a very sensitive generation. I think, part of that sensitivity comes from the way we raise them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because I think we're hyper attuned. I think a lot of the moms that I work with are hyper attuned to their children, and they're hyper attuned to us.
Yeah.
Yes. And so when there is like stress and conflict in the home, part of me wonders if there was some unconscious mechanism that drew the attention to her, right, away from sort of maybe the conflict between me and my husband at the time. Now we have this shared interest in our daughter
Mm-hmm.
and, attending to her difficulties, if that makes sense. Yes. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to say it worked. Our relationship was in a lot of trouble at the time. And I would say
You and your
my
husband. Yeah.
husband and
Okay. Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And now we are solid, really, really good.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
So, but you said that you left working at the school at this point, and is this when you went into life coaching or coaching life?
Mhm. It is. I didn't do a lot of one-on-one work back then. I worked with women in business, and
Oh,
I did retreats for women in business and masterminds, um, which is yeah, it's just a meeting structure where people come together to support each other. So it's that sort of
okay.
idea that if you get more heads together, you come up with more creative solutions.
Yeah.
And so people could bring their problems to the mastermind and get input from other women in business and brainstorm together.
Hmm.
And so I used it, and I did workshops and education events.
What was that like working with all these high-powered women?
It was intimidating. I mean, I kind of launched myself into the scene because that's how I roll, is I tend to get in quickly with lots of confidence. And then once I'm in, I'm like, oh, I'm in over my head. Right. And then I panic a little and it was hard. It was really, really fun in the beginning. And then I started uh, like researching, paying attention, um, and thinking, being in business for myself is hard, and it's going to take a lot of work, and it's a lot of learning, and it was just intimidating,
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
and there were other high powered, like truly high powered, female coaches in the space that I was in. And I got intimidated and was thinking, oh my gosh, I can't compete
Huh.
with these other coaches. And so started playing really small actually there for a while. I was in a pretty difficult place in 2018.
What do you mean playing small? This sounds like a female life coach term. Like showing up, playing small.
Right. Yeah. I just had a real crisis of confidence.
Okay.
Um, and and stopped putting myself out there as far as
Huh.
I went into kind of input mode, which so I'm thinking like input output. Am I creating or am I learning? Am I
Yeah.
am I taking in information or am I creating and offering things to the world? Right. And I kind of went into intense input mode and wasn't making any money and and then my daughter is also struggling at the same time and I've
Yeah.
got to figure something out for her because it's
Okay.
creating a bit of a crisis in the family. And so I kind of shifted away from that and actually started researching education models.
Oh,
Yes, so kind
okay.
of started focusing on my thoughts around education and kind of getting clarity on those and understanding, putting names, labeling, right, which is another thing that we can take to the next level. And
Labeling? Like with one of those label makers from Office Depot, you just went around and you
naming, like
just.
naming things,
Okay. Yeah.
which is, I think, what our kids are doing, right? They're naming their discomfort, and
Okay.
they're naming their discomfort transgender, right? So we've got discomfort, they've got a label, they put that label on the discomfort, and it becomes very real for them,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so,
and how were you labeling like education models?
yeah, like trying to understand why teaching felt so awful much of the time. Not all the time, but much of
Really?
the time.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, like
Why did it feel awful? Like you.
I think we're doing childhood wrong is what I think.
Oh,
I
okay.
think yes. And so I don't think children are designed to spend hours and hours of their day in an education institution, with all that constant input. I just don't think that that's a healthy way to spend childhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, you felt discomfort And then you left. So, and then you started looking back at education. Were you naming your discomfort as an educator a couple of years later out of the system? Is that what you mean by
Yeah.
labeling? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a role in that school as well. They were very focused on professional development. And
Mm.
I was one of the team of educators there who was like a faculty trainer. So
Oh,
we
okay.
were
Yeah.
we were assigned with like researching certain aspects of education and then leading what's called professional learning communities.
Among
And
the
so
teachers.
among the teachers,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And so learning a lot about assessment and motivation. And I mean, it was great. It was actually a lot of great information to help me make sense of this amazing experience of being a human, right? It
Yeah.
really contributed to my, what I would say now is my personal philosophy.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, just side note, how many other kids are there in your family?
I have, she's got a brother. So I have a boy as well, a
Is
younger.
she younger?
He's
She's
younger.
older.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
He's younger.
He's my
And
oldest.
so,
Mhm.
so what is a human being?
Mhm. And my philosophy?
Every philosophy probably has some sort of conception of the human being. But
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question, like, what is a human being and how does a human being develop or grow? Like, what do you mean by childhood? So what is a human being? And then what is childhood, and then how do you frame that?
Yeah. Well, humans are part of this living system of the earth, like other mammals. We just have a left brain problem.
Huh.
um, we are social creatures, right? We are wired to be in relationship. And so we have these attachment mechanisms that are designed to keep us in relationship.
Okay.
And mammals learn how to be in the world through play. And there's plenty of research to support this. And so when we reduce the amount of play children have,
Yeah.
we are, how children spend their childhood matters a lot. I think they learn a lot in school, but I think it's less about the content and it's more about the structure.
Yeah.
That's how young humans learn to be in the world, right? They're wired to uptake the culture. And so whatever the culture of the classroom is, or, the culture that they're growing up in, that's what's being absorbed into their bodies. Does that make sense? That's what they're learning.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so we need to be really mindful of the environments. What environments are our children growing up in?
What do you mean by play? What does that mean?
Well, play is, it is a it's been a little while since maybe I've read an official definition, but I like the work of Peter Gray. He's an evolutionary psychologist, and he's one of the founders at Let Grow with Lenore Skenazy, who I know has
Okay.
also collaborated with Jonathan Haidt or Haidt. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right.
Yeah.
But it's not goal oriented, right? So, like a football game is not play according to their definition of play.
Okay.
Play is yeah, it's not structured. I mean, you could like design a game or something and you'd be playing as long as it's as you're in it just to it's about the process, right? If you're enjoying the process, you're playing. If it's goal oriented, it's not necessarily considered play.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Or
Yeah.
yeah. And so children need lots of opportunities to play. School has taken up more and more of their day, more and more of their summer, right? The way our society values education, and I can't help but use the air quotes there.
Yeah, but even though there's more and more education, there's less and less academic rigor at the same time, right? More and more structure, less and less, reading competency, math competency, all these competencies seem to, across the board, be collapsing while the structure itself.
Well, and I think this
increasing.
comes back down. This is attachment mechanisms is part of the reason for this. There's this concept. That Gordon Neufeld has developed. He didn't coin the term, but he's developed the concept of counter will. which is it's basically the resistance to perceived control, and he would say it's an instinct. Humans are going to resist control especially if they're not in healthy attachment with the person who is
Okay.
exerting the control over them.
Yeah. Okay. So this is oppositional defiance disorder. Yeah.
If you want to diagnose it.
If we want to diagnose it, because we love diagnosis things.
And that's just
Diagnosis.
one way that it presents. That's right. But it can present in lots of other ways. It can present in apathy, right?
Yeah.
Usually, what counterwill produces is the opposite of what you're hoping to get. Like you want something out of this person, and you're not getting it. You're getting the opposite, and it's the result of counterwill. And
So,
Neufeld would say it's not intentional. That that person doesn't. They're not doing it just to push your buttons or be difficult.
Okay. And that ties into this concept of motivation and how that fits into, I guess, education or childhood, broadly speaking. Yeah. So
an internal and external locus of control. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So how does one assess the motivation of a student? I guess this is really like far out, like very bones stuff. I don't know if it's really necessarily attached to anything. We're just floating in ideas and stuff, but I'm kind of like just for framework, right. Like what is the goal of the teacher? Is the goal of the teacher to assess the motivation of every individual child and establish conditions where those motivations can go in a direction where they are learning, right, or growing, or just playing in some way?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the question and the goal of the teacher. Well, the teacher is part of the system, right? So the teacher has their own set of criteria. It's more about the structure, but I don't think teachers recognize this. That our education system was put in place at a time when the economy needed factory workers. And so they have content that they're supposed to, make sure these children are becoming competent in. But I would say it's so much less about the content. The teachers have to teach the content, and that's what they get assessed on.
Yeah.
But it's more about the structure of the classroom. I think what kids are learning at school is how to sit and listen to an authority figure and to minimize mistakes, and out of this, comes sort of our value around failure. And the kind of, we label failure as bad when really making mistakes is how we learn.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And so we do know that carrots and sticks or rewards and punishments, it doesn't work very well. That reprograms people to have an external locus of control.
Okay.
And kind of disconnects them from their intuition, right? And I would say that is the main function of the education system, is that.
To disconnect people from their intuition.
To reorient. Right, because it's to reorient and to standardize, right? And I don't want to like put a judgment on this. I just think it is what it is, and it served a function. It makes people easier to steer, a different direction, and makes them more predictable, and makes them ready to contribute to the economy, right? So, but it's not necessarily great for a sense of, satisfaction and meaning in your life.
Who said that a sense of satisfaction and meaning is all that important for the human being?
Who said that?
Yeah, who says?
Well,
like maybe that's just a left brain, like weird fantasy thing.
Sure, maybe. Yeah. But I know
does every
for
culture,
myself,
different cultures have different values. So I'm just trying to attack that as an assumption. It's my assumption.
Yeah.
But why do we assume that meaning and satisfaction are the end all be all of our life?
I don't assume that. I assume that my quality of life is better when I am experiencing satisfaction and meaning. Right. I
Yeah.
think that we are wired for those experiences and that our body rewards us, right? Like that's satisfaction is a label, right, for an experience
Yes.
that feels good in the body,
But
right?
different societies establish different structures which aim people in different ways of finding
Yeah.
meaning, like traditional family or like honor culture, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever our
Mm-hmm.
culture is right now, which
Mm-hmm.
is you do you and you are you are totally special, just like everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talking systemically, talking the
Yeah.
structures of that. So when
Yeah. So my personal belief is that we are all born wired
okay,
for creativity, right? For curiosity, for meaningful contribution.
okay,
Right. That's why
yeah,
it feels good when we're engaged in those things,
okay,
and I think as a creature on the, as a species, but that our feelings are information, and that when we're operating optimally, life mostly feels good. I mean, it's going to have its ups and downs. Everybody's going to experience pain and suffering and anger, and right, like negative emotions are also information, but they're information to guide us back to a sense of satisfaction and meaning, and and being in relationship, which I think is another uh, essential aspect of being a human being, right? Is And that's why our attachment mechanisms encourage us to be in relationship. And yeah, is this making sense?
yeah. So
And please ask
I'm
me clarifying questions if if there are gaps in this,
no,
because
this is fun. This is
I'll
fun.
go back and listen and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't explain that well.
Well,
Or
there's not a goal here. This is just playtime with Benjamin Boyce.
yes, exactly.
Right.
And I came into this conversation knowing that, and that was
Okay.
great, to just be like, oh, I have no idea where this is going to go,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure it's going to be fun.
So with your daughter,
Hmm.
like with just the background of like there's motivation, there's attachment, there's relationships, there's a changing body, there's a reformulation of identity where she's detaching from you and trying to attach to herself. She finds this tool, this toolkit, this strategy, this
Hmm.
bucket of strategies called gender. And she's, from your point of view, like, how did she start to play around with that? And then how did it manifest in you and how did you react to that?
Yeah. So there were these struggles going on in school, and she along the way, like there were different periods or different things that happened during middle school. At one point she brought me a little booklet of basically sexual orientations and identities,
Yeah.
and I had most of them I'd never heard of before. That was probably my first introduction into gender ideology,
Yeah. Okay.
and
Yeah.
she just kind of dropped it in my lap and went away, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I tried to engage her on it, but she wasn't super interested in talking about it.
But she sent you a signal, but she didn't want to go any deeper than.
Yeah. And
Huh.
it wasn't a signal I knew how to read at the time. Like I said,
Yeah.
I didn't know this was happening in the world in the way that it was. Yeah. And so then, it was actually a friend of mine who was also the mother of one of her friends. So you can imagine, like, my community is very much also part of this school. Um, and
Very
she's the one
takes a
who,
villagey, huh?
yeah. Well, and I can look back at the culture of that school now and be like, ooh, okay, yeah, it's no wonder we ended up here.
Hmm.
Um, Very progressive, right? I would use the word woke. It's very much the culture
Before
now.
you really understood that, that was how
Right,
you just assumed the world
right, right.
was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so would have been early spring of her eighth grade year is when her friend's mother, she just invited me out and showed me this guest list for her daughter's birthday party.
Okay.
And everybody on the guest list was one thing or another. It was like their name and then their chosen name, or it might have been like chosen name, orientation. I don't remember the columns, but there was clearly an expectation there that you had put yourself in these boxes and which boxes were you in, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah. Is it like musical chairs, but with gender? Like there's like one that's missing, and then everybody just kind of swaps identities until somebody's
maybe, yeah,
ass
I don't
is
know.
bouncing on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you receive that information then?
It was just kind of like, huh? It
Okay.
just didn't really sink in. It just seemed silly and it just seemed like a kid thing. These guys they're just playing. And then I started researching, then I got online. Yeah. And, and that was terrifying. Um, that was probably the scariest part. And my kid wasn't interested in discussing it. She didn't want to, I can't even put myself back in that time and remember an attempt at a conversation about it even. I just know she wasn't wanting to talk about it.
Okay.
But what she was wanting at that time was an ADHD diagnosis
Oh.
and therapy, and she was starting to talk about anxiety and depression. And so there were
Okay.
these other things going on. I would say when my confidence really dropped out is when she implied that she might be harming herself. And that's that's probably the first time when I thought, oh, I don't got this. You know what I mean? Up to that point, I was like, we'll figure this out.
Okay.
If you're struggling with executive functioning, there are strategies for that. And I can help you with that. If I take you to a therapist, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Because that would be the therapist I would choose, right? Is the one that's going to work with you strategy wise. And so it wasn't until it was just one time actually where she implied that she was maybe hurting herself. It came out kind of weird. She didn't give me any details, and
Yeah.
um, that's when I got scared,
Okay.
and started, really researching ways forward. And we took some unusual steps. We had some unusual strategies ourselves.
But like ropes courses or something? Like what was these?
Well, I did take her out of that school, and she ended up doing a wilderness program that
Okay.
if I were
Yeah.
to do this over again, I would not.
Oh.
To me, that was that was my biggest error, was sending her there.
Was to
So
send her into the woods with like a knife and say, see you in 6 months kind of thing?
right. I mean, and rites of passage, and that's actually what I was going for. Is I was hoping it could be a rite of passage, and they weren't able to customize it for my kid, and
Okay.
it just
It fell
yeah.
flat. She
Yeah.
was
And
even
personally, I think that,
more alienated?
well, I think it damaged our attachment. I think it sent a signal to her that, yeah, my mom doesn't got this.
Oh.
If I consider my whole family though, and what was going on, it was a strategy that made sense. I can justify the choice. Regardless, it still damaged our attachment. I think it affected her confidence in me because
Why? Was this a wilderness program, like a 3 month like boarding school
mhm.
in the woods kind of
It
thing?
wasn't a boarding school, but this one would be considered more of an intervention program.
Oh,
And
okay.
so a lot of kids do go on from there to boarding school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you
And
sent her away, basically.
yes,
That was the
exactly.
gesture that she read.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. I think that's what happened.
Okay.
Yes. And the kids that are in this particular program the behaviors are pretty extreme. And hers didn't match
Oh.
that.
Oh.
I
So
didn't
she was
think.
sent a signal, perhaps additionally, that she was really messed up.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
To a point that her mother couldn't,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That we didn't have it. we couldn't handle it. So we
What
needed.
what if you just required that she work at Taco Bell 20 hours a week for the summer or something like that?
Mhm.
Would that have
Oh,
been
she was
like
still
a,
pretty young at the time. I
oh,
don't
she's
know
still
that
pretty young.
at that point. Yeah, she was 14.
Yeah. I'm
13,
just
13 turning 14.
I'm just wondering
Which, by the way,
to
my
what
14-year-old son got a job. Right? So he's been working since 14.
yeah, I'm just wondering
Yeah.
to what extent a certain contingent of the ROGD cohort just is lacking meaningful work, lacking some sort of feedback
Yes.
loop between their motivation and their effort and,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
money or a product or some sort of valuable like feedback from the outside world.
Yeah, for sure. And she has been working for the last couple of years. And 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 like I said, my son does too. He's been working since 14. Oh, yeah. I'm a big fan of jobs. at least at least until you figure out, what is going to
Pursuit.
bring you more satisfaction and meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did her gender identity coalesce from your point of view and become more and more concrete or an issue or something that you actually saw?
Yeah. Um, so she wouldn't discuss it at that program with her therapist. We encouraged that,
But it
and
was there. There was some sort of identity thingy
with her or at the program.
with her.
Yeah. So that this happened after that friend shared the guest list, the party guest list.
And what was your daughter? How did she identify? Was she like a unicorn or trans mask, lightly femme demi boy or something like that?
I don't think it was that intricate or detailed. I think she
Yeah,
just
it was
trans
male.
mask. Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
as a boy. Yes.
Okay.
And it's taken different shapes over,
It
the
keeps
course of
changing. It's
time.
It's playful.
Well, it's playful. I mean, she now says she's a boy. So um
Not a man.
I think I don't know that she uses man that often. She might say she's a trans man. I'm not exactly sure. We don't have a whole lot of conversations about it because they they don't feel good for her, because I'm honest. I'm honest with her. Um, and so, yeah. So let's see. I mean, we weren't talking about it at all for another year. So it wasn't until she was almost 15 that we actually were having some conversations about it. And the interesting part of that is I kind of had to drag it out of her. And she said she was never going to tell me. So.
Okay.
So it makes me wonder too. Like sometimes I think if I hadn't dragged it out of her and she had to just kind of grapple with it, if she might have let it go by now. I kind of think that's a strong possibility.
What was
But
your
because
motivation
I
in
gave
wanting
her
to?
something to push back on, yeah,
Yeah.
my motivation at that point was to get her out of the binder.
So she had started messing around with her body. Then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was not successful.
Okay. How did you come across that article of clothing?
I didn't come across it. She, at this point, I knew she was far enough along in development that I should see you know, some chest there, and there wasn't.
Hmm.
So, and I had to get real. I mean, she did say a year earlier that it wasn't a thing when she came out of that program, and I brought it up, just to kind of see where she was. She's like, "It's over. Let's just drop it." And I happily dropped it because I wanted it dropped. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, then a year later, I'm like, oh boy, yeah, She's still binding. I was picking her up she'd been hanging out with some friends, and I went to pick her up, and they said, "Later, bro." One of them did. So she got in the car, and I decided this was the time to figure out what was happening. And we spent a few days having some really great conversations. Um, I think I handled it really well those first few days. But at night, I would go online. I would research and get really scared. And then I started operating out of fear. And I think fear-driven parenting decisions, may not, at least for me, didn't go so well.
Well, you're introducing more stress in the system and more opportunity for resistance, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And it was also when I was recognizing just how captured she was, just how deep in she was to the belief system that I didn't know what happened. I didn't realize that she had adopted it so fully. I thought I could use logic.
Yeah. I was thinking like, well, how do you start to disentangle that? I guess you have to start to learn it from her point of view, because the ideology is just this soup that she gets to play in, right, and arrange it however she wants to arrange it. So like the contours of that are not stable. There's no like doctrine, central text, and it's just always going to be fluid and changing anyways, because it's based on totally subjective inputs and expectations. And we're talking about a teenage girl too, who's going through this battery of hormone cocktails already, and emotional development and mental development, all that stuff going on.
And it's fun. I know how fun it is.
Well, everything's fun and games until your back gets contorted and you can't breathe anymore because you're compressing your chest like some sort of Chinese woman in the Golden City or whatever, like this weird kind of ritual. Ritual scarification, ritual mutilation. Which is again like a part of a rite of passage. Yeah, it's very meaningful.
It's meaningful. Yeah. This provides a lot of meaning in their lives. Yes.
Yeah.
It's another thing the strategy offers. Yeah.
So how did you start to, I guess you said you're acting out of fear, and you're looking on the internet for research. So what, Reddit, Tumblr, medical things like GLAD.
Your channel.
My channel. So you start to look for skeptics of the gender ideology, or like more information that can be useful for you to figure out what the heck all these symbols are.
Well, yes. And yes, exactly. I'm looking for skeptics. That's what I'm doing. People who can see what I'm seeing, which is that this isn't a legitimate condition, right, that my child has. I know she's not a boy. Are there other people that recognize, that are seeing the same phenomenon happening? And there were plenty, more than a year before when I had been researching, which wasn't super comforting,
Okay.
It's just grown, that there were more kids now who were identifying. And that was.
Is she aware that she's very feminine for being a boy? Because it just sounds like she's acting like a girl, but maybe I'm talking to her mother, so. Just on the face of it, there's so much cognitive distortion unless you don't understand the difference between men and women, and you're just completely confused about that to begin with.
Yeah. She doesn't even really present very masculine. There was a while there where it seemed like she was really trying to look like a boy. Now I don't notice that as much, yet she's pretty convinced that all her coworkers believe she's a boy. So,
not a man, but a boy.
Yeah. Again, not wanting to grow up, right?
Yeah. No, I Peter Pan. I get to be Peter Pan.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a very relevant.
And the boys get to be Tinkerbell.
Symbolism there. But she's great. I mean, she's cool. I like her a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a cool kid.
So, okay, so to what degree do you start to say, okay, this is a problem. This is potentially very dangerous for her body, her fertility, her life choices, and this is also confusing, but you still love her. Like, how do you figure out where to put all this anxiety and the danger that you sense in this thing and your love? Like, how do they fit in?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a desperation to make it stop. This really is traumatizing
Why is it
for,
traumatizing for a mother to see this happen to her daughter specifically?
Mhm. Well, it's that medical pathway, and we can imagine what pain is down the road, especially, I mean, not just the health pain, but also just, how, how you are in the world and how people perceive you. But I think it's more than that too. Again, we're talking about this cohort of moms who are very, very intentional in the way they raise their kids. At least, again, I'm going to say these are the moms that seem to find their way to me.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
a common experience, it would seem. And there tends to be often like almost I call them high stakes kids, right? There's like an extra level of intention or commitment. Like there were either problems in conception. A lot of them are older moms, or there were other health problems with the child when they were little, right? So they required extra care,
Oh.
which is it's going to, I think, add to that level of enmeshment, right? Um, and so there's that level of it where, okay, I worked so hard on this kid. It's like the kid's your project, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And so the outcome really matters. It's like I wasn't predicting this. And how could this possibly be the outcome when I worked so hard to be this caring, loving, relationship oriented parent, right? So you've got that. And then layered on top of that, you have, I mean, it's incredibly destabilizing to then go seek support and have the institutions with the experts that are supposed to help you telling you you're the one who needs to change, right?
Yeah.
So it's so destabilizing. I mean, this just rips your world apart because not only does it feel like you're losing your kid, but you've lost your community, you've lost your
Your
leadership,
authority.
right?
Yeah.
You're exactly, and it rips your compass out from under you. That's a very, very painful place to be,
What is
and
the
confusing
similarity for the
and lonely.
mothers that you find or that find you? I assume that most of them are gender skeptics. So what's something that you see that they share, these mothers share, and not going along with the gender program? Like,
Mm.
is it like, is there kind of a pattern that you see in the
Somewhat,
character
it's not
personalities?
completely consistent there. It varies. Some moms, most of them, not all of them, but most of them came from the left, right? They were very liberal minded moms.
Hmm.
A lot of them were kind of crunchy moms. I was more of a crunchy mom, right? As far
Hmm.
as,
Not a munchie, but a crunchy.
right? Very health oriented, right?
Yes. Okay.
Which again, like that's a value set that we think our child, we've tried to share with our children, and it feels like they're rejecting it. So there's that too. It
Oh,
feels
all that
very
talk about like
personal.
organic and GMO and like now all the kids are
Right.
running into synthetic hormones and
Yes. Yes.
body mods. Huh.
Right. Exactly. So we value a healthy body is also definitely a pretty consistent factor.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Hmm.
so again, you can kind of see the individuation strategy. My mom's into this. I can't be into that. And we get scoffed at a lot now, And so
What do you mean? How?
the crunchy moms, you know, they're they're not
They're not hip anymore?
they're skeptical of this more um do I want to use the word
Transhumanist.
invasive, right? This medical apparatus that we have these days that
Yeah.
that pathologizes everything, you know.
Yeah.
So that is definitely a commonality, you know. And I would have to say too, and not across the board, I think it's more destabilizing for those people who are inclined and really need to trust
The experts.
right, the institutions that you think are there to take care of you. You know,
Yeah. Wow.
I
Okay.
consider it a bit of an advantage that I was already,
In the
you
system,
know,
but not of the system.
suspicious.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
This is a big
And I feel like
crisis.
I have a high tolerance to, to function outside of most of them. You know, I don't engage in these systems the way a lot of the moms or a lot of families do. And I think
Yeah.
it's more destabilizing when that's the case. So, yeah.
The this kind of straying from the point, but it's just something that I'm fascinated with. Liberalism, the secular society. It seems like a lot of people, like most people, are not cutting edge thinkers. Most people just kind of exist in the world that they're given and do the best with what they're given. And the liberal assumptions kind of put us in a place where we don't really need church. We don't need a belief system because we've figured it all out. We have experts, we have systems, we have governments, we have schools, we have this, so the liberal project or the liberal person believes in progressive values. It believes that Obama has everybody's best interest at heart. Believes, like the Wall Street's out of control, and we do too many wars, but by and large, we are the shining light, and we are leading the world morally. And so I'm just a part of the system and stuff. And so when the system betrays that, when articles of faith kind of creep up, like, oh yeah, well, you have a gendered soul. Like there's a spiritual element that the children aren't given anymore, and that we as Gen Xers, if I may say so, kind of took for granted. Like, well, Christians are kind of sticks in the mud. We're going to adopt all of their values, but we're going to let go of all the mythology, not knowing that our kids need and thirst for, something more than just Marvel cartoons, something more than Disney. Like they need something that they can live and breathe and believe and use to imprint their will on the world and be enmeshed in something greater, some greater cause. And so when the system is the one that's feeding that, you're like, wait, I thought we were in a secular society. I thought you guys were just going to, you experts were just going to take care of the details and not have a belief system. And then all of a sudden this belief system just explodes into our consciousness. Rainbow flags, progress flags, like child transition is the thing that we need to do. Like all this stuff, like all the racial stuff on top of that. Like the well-meaning Gen X liberal is like, hold on, and then like free falls, or is given what option? Like to really start to deeply skeptically review and question all of their assumptions, or just go along with the path, go along with the pack. Keep your head down. You have questions, but I don't want to mess with my income. I don't want to stand out. I just want to keep on living my life as I was promised I could live it. Just to paint a picture of people whose daughter suddenly comes home and says that she's a man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, for making sense of the human experience, you have to consider that. And I've heard it recently called the God-shaped hole, right? Or the religious function, which seems to be very embedded in us. And I've heard you say there was an interview with Lisa Marciano, and I have recommended, it was a great interview all the way through, but I often have clients listen to the last 10 minutes of it, where you talk about, I think you say, scientists, very serious scientists usually come to the conclusion that rationality is not enough, right? And then Lisa shares a couple of quotes, one of them being David Foster Wallace's quote about humans worship. It's what we do. We worship. And so being really conscious about what you worship is important. Otherwise, what you worship will eat you alive.
Yeah.
Right? Gender, I think, is eating lots of people alive. Yeah. Well, and then she also quotes Jung as saying, something about, when asked if humans are going to survive the nuclear age, he's not very optimistic. And that he believes if we're going to make it, more of us need to do that shadow work, that inner work. And so
Yeah.
this
Okay.
is where I went with it, right?
Okay.
Like this is the work I decided to do. And this is what I invite my clients to do is is that Stoic idea of the obstacle is the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Use this, and it's often something this difficult that inspires that work anyway. Like you asked me what inspired me. Well, it just got too hard. It was too painful to keep going the way I was going. I had to find a way to feel better, and it kind of became the way I gave the finger to the movement. Right? It's like, no, you don't get my family, and you don't get my quality of life. I will not sacrifice that to you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to figure out how to improve the quality of my life. Right.
Yeah.
And life is what filled my God-shaped hole. Right. I'd like to capitalize L now in life, because that's what I live in service to. That's what provides meaning in my world. So my values are very clear, and my daughter knows my values, but I don't impose them on her. That's
You
what I
live
had to
them.
stop doing.
You model them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't have to answer this question, but I'm really interested in relationships right now, specifically marriage,
Me too.
because I'm thinking about it
Mhm.
seriously right now.
Mm.
How did this?
Congratulations. Is that what you're saying? Are you?
I'm looking at the camera for anybody who's just listening to the podcast. Pregnant look into the camera. How did this risk and stress in your relationship with your husband, what did it force you to reassess about your marriage? And how did you go from a state of being on shaky ground to being on solid ground? Like, what was that passage
I
like for
love
you?
this question, actually. Thank you for asking it. um, it was a process. It took quite a while, but I set out to learn about relationships. My daughter ended up taking a psych test, in which there was lots, a battery of tests, but part of the testing, she was filling in some sentence starters, right? And one of them was, "I wish my mom would." And she completed it with, "Listen." And
Was
I
that
was like,
shocking?
"What?" It was shocking. Yes, it was shocking. And I was like, how does she come to that? I'm a fantastic listener, right? Like I'm a really great communicator. But the thing was, her story was, I didn't listen. And so I set out to learn about listening. What does that really mean? What does that look like? How do I become a better listener? I really got invested in attachment, understanding attachment, and learning how to be in healthy relationship. When this was kind of at its peak, right after she and I did start having conversations, and I was in that fear, I said to my husband, this can be the thing, like the last straw that tears us apart, or it can be the thing that brings us together, But I'm the one who set out to learn how to be in a healthy relationship. I think most of us don't have a great model, people haven't been. I feel like we have strayed far from our attachment mechanisms that keep us in relationship, right? I feel like our culture has kind of taken us very far from them. And most of us experience this sense of separation, and I'm very invested in our common humanity. But when it comes to sort of my own relationship with my husband, I became determined to use the same strategies I was using with my daughter. I'm going to practice listening. I'm going to practice caring for him. My mom at one point said, we love the ones we serve. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I looked for models of healthy relationships. I was lucky enough to have a best friend has been married for like 30 years and they just have such a beautiful relationship. I started paying attention to it and going, oh, look at those nice things they do for each other, you know,
Yeah.
and started doing things out of love. So this is one of my little, you know, I like having a set of guiding principles, and one of them is never do anything with resentment. Now, do I accomplish that all the time? No, but that's sort of my goal. Is
Okay.
if
Yeah.
I'm feeling resentment, I check myself. Can I do this with love? And if I can't, then there is some boundary I need to address. Right. So I use that resentment as information.
Could you extrapolate on that? Like, what is the information that resentment is sending you generally, or sending one generally? You said something about boundaries. You said something about attachment, or like a misalignment of expectations. What does that mean? What's
Um, yes. To me, that's when I'm feeling resentment. If I'm doing something for somebody, right, and
yeah.
I'm experiencing resentment, I want to assess that, right? What is making me feel resentful? You know, is it because I feel like this isn't
Mm.
going to be reciprocated, you know, or am I feeling taken advantage of? Right. I want to understand what's underneath it, you know, and can I shift it and do this, make this an act of love that makes me feel good? I want to put love in what I'm doing. I want to practice love, you know. And so if I can't go there, then I need to not do it and have a conversation maybe. Does that make sense? Like, I can't do this for you because I feel this way.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be honest with
Yes. Okay.
whoever I'm in relationship with and not just hang on to that resentment, because I know that resentment is bad for my health. Right. and it's bad for the relationship. And humans function, we heal in relationship. We are resourced in relationship, right? We are healthy in relationship. They know that this is the number one factor for quality of life and longevity is healthy relationships. But I think most of us don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So I just and it is it's practice. That's what life is. We are going through our days practicing things, and what you practice grows stronger. If you're practicing resentment, guess what? You're going to get more and more resentful.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're practicing love, what's amazing is it feels good. And the more you practice, the better it feels, the more you want to do it.
Yeah.
You know,
The more
so
natural.
I would say love is a practice.
Love is a practice. We're coming up with coffee mugs now.
I know it sounds trite, sure, but you know what? It feels good.
Yeah. What is love? What do you mean by that? What is this word you're using?
And I would say it's also an attachment mechanism, you
Okay.
know. So I encourage clients to really pay attention to their physiology and figure out for themselves what love feels like. What does love feel like in your body?
Yeah.
And what creates that sensation? And so and then how do you add more of that into your life?
Okay.
Okay. And usually when we're experiencing love, it's probably what oxytocin, you know, some of those. Our body rewards us when we
Yeah.
are in healthy relationship with feelings of love. Right. And so again, you can use, there's so much wisdom in the body. Pay attention to your feelings and they're going to guide you. Right. Which is very different than like sitting in a classroom and suppressing them, which is
Yeah.
usually what you have to do when you're in a learning environment for extended periods of time. Right. You can't listen to those signals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
How does one, I guess you haven't been successful at this, but maybe you've seen success in this area. How does one convince a daughter or a son to love their body, to listen, to love, to learn to love? You have to wait. It's there. It's up for them. It's up to them.
right. I can model it,
Okay.
you know, but I
Yeah.
can't.
You
It's
can't
her
impose love.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. You can't
Okay.
impose
Yeah.
love. I mean, that's my experience. That's my philosophy. I don't want
Yeah.
to judge the way anybody else is going about this,
Hmm.
you know. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
there's an aspect of detachment in your attachment to your daughter that is absolutely necessary in order to maintain the attachment.
Yeah. You got
And
it.
that's a learning curve not only for the daughter but for the mother.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. And it's painful,
Is it?
right? Because yes,
There's like
because
contractions involved and there's weird placenta shooting out of you and just like
kinda, it's a grief process. You These moms have to go through a grieving process. This
okay.
letting go, of the attachment is not easy. It's a very painful thing,
Okay.
and it's confusing. And what helps me now is to kind of think in terms of parts, like
Hmm.
we had a recent experience, my daughter and I, where my mama bear really did come back up to the surface. And I was kind of glad, like I needed that. I was feeling maybe a little too detached, I think.
Yeah.
And so it was good to see mama bear again. But I think if, again, the strategy of labeling, if you can identify your mama bear, then you can recognize when she takes the wheel. Does that make sense? I
Hmm.
had a client sort of bring that analogy to me, and I love it. That we all sort of have this bus, and we've got different characters that take the wheel. And so I think, what I strive to do is to just not be in mama bear mode all the time. She serves a function. I'm very grateful for her, but I can't let her drive the bus all the time, or
Yeah.
I would be miserable. Yeah. So
Yeah.
because mama bear is very attached to her kids' outcomes.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Did I answer the question? I forgot what it was.
Have you seen Cocaine Bear yet? I kind of want to see it now. I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it either.
Okay.
That does look
It's the
funny.
cocaine mama bear.
Yeah.
Okay, so grief, that's another thing that I'm dealing with in my personal life now. So I just like to hear like, what is the process of grief? I know like there's 7 stages that it's kind of like blah, 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 blah. I know there's all these different ways that we can conceptualize it, but like it serves a function and there's just sadness. Like when you lose somebody, there's just sadness and you can't think your way out of it. I've been not wrestling with it, but I just realized that like I just feel sad about something and I can think about it. That doesn't really help because I'm just spinning narratives to distance myself from the sadness. So I kind of just have to sit with that and then let it pass. And then the next day, like I kind of, it's like almost like shoveling snow. It's like, okay, we're just shoveling emotional snow right now and there'll be more snow later, but at least the sidewalk's going to be clear when I wake up in the morning. I can get to my car, like I'm making a pathway out of it. Like I'm just throwing things out there. So I'm wondering, it's such a difficult thing because at one time, in one way you're saying you're trying to, in your position, you're trying to save a relationship. You're trying to save a daughter. You're trying to help your daughter attach to herself naturally and honestly and not use these tools that she's been given to be disattached. But at the same time, the gender thing is like, oh, my daughter's a man now. So it's almost like you were saying about like the obstacle. It's like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to grieve about something else. And if I can not respond to the threat, but respond to actually what I'm actually going through and be honest with myself, I'm letting my daughter become an adult. And this whole man thing is just the way that she wants to do it. So without like accepting the gender ideology, buying into it, you still have to accept that this is to some degree valid for her.
Yes. Yeah. You said so much in that.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. I want to tackle a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yes. So remind me to come back to the snow. You asked about grief.
Yeah.
And there's this attachment concept, and I don't know if this is legit or not, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So Neufeld has this idea of futility and bumping up against futility. And this is how humans adapt, right? We bump up against futility over and over again. And each time is an opportunity to practice adaptation, right? So, or not practice.
Wait,
saying that right.
futility like as in
Each time we
failure or like,
develop, yes.
okay.
Well, yes. So, like, I would say people with transition regret, they were bumping up against futility. I will never be a man. I will never be a woman. I can do all these things. I'm never actually going to be a woman. And they
Yeah.
hit that futility wall, and then they have to accept they can't change that. This is that idea, accept the things you cannot change. But this is how human adaptation works, or at least that's my understanding.
Mm.
But in that futility, as you're bumping up against that, I think that's when we go through the grief process. And so Neufeld will say, in order to adapt, we have to drop into our tears of sadness. This is the function of sadness, is
Huh.
acceptance. I can't change this. I have to process through this disappointment and sadness.
Yeah.
And then once you do,
Yeah.
now you experience radical acceptance, and you can move forward with, creativity and new energy. And, it frees, it's freeing you from the attachment to this thing you cannot have. Right. That's what
Hmm.
radical acceptance is. And that's my understanding. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and so,
What a mind fuck.
new, it is exactly.
Pardon my
Oh my gosh.
French.
I have
Yeah.
I have a piece called that.
Oh, like, is it a coffee
Because,
mug? Because it
well,
could
no,
be.
sorry, an article that I wrote, that I titled that. Yes, that it was about a conversation with my daughter. So,
Really?
yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I have this interesting idea about expectations and counter will, and right, like it kind of comes back to all that. That I think I get pushback when I talk about expectations, but I think again I know I'm kind of all over the place. I'm going to pull
That's
it
fine.
back
That's fine.
together for you.
That's good.
But I think one other aspect of this strategy is they're avoiding expectations. Okay. Expectations trigger counter will, right? Well, how do you raise a child without expectations? You have to have expectations. But I think what I would encourage is to, instead of voicing your expectations, hold the vision of who you want your child to be, and
Mm.
just treat them like this is who they are.
Yeah.
Right. There's this
Mm.
there's this Taoist saying, I believe it's from the Tao. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. So my MO with my daughter is to trust and to convey my confidence in her very human capacity to figure things out.
Yeah.
And that's how I function. You got this. I trust you to make the healthiest decisions you can for yourself and your future. You're going to do the best you can, because isn't that what we're all doing? We're all just doing the best we can. And don't humans figure things out? That's what we do. We figure things out. So to
Yeah.
me, it's not the end of the world either, right? Like, I don't want her to get that story, that should she choose to, touch the flame and go
Yeah.
down that pathway a little bit, that she can't change her mind. I want her to
Yeah.
know she can always change her mind, and that life isn't over. It's just a hard thing. And most of us have hard things in our lives.
Hmm.
How are you going to use this hard thing to get where you want to go?
Hmm.
Anyway, so I know that was a lot too. I did want to come
Grief,
back to,
snow,
yeah, grief and snow.
futility.
So
Yeah.
I got to kind of watch this in real time with my kid, right? She goes to visit her, I'll call it her trans community, right? Her friends. We moved. That was one of our strategies, is we did move away from where we lived before, where I taught, and where she, had this community. And she visits them often. And she wanted to go a few months ago. And the weather was not great. And there was a good chance she wasn't going to be able to drive. And she knew this the night before, right? And then the next morning, it was pretty bad. And I knew before she even came down, she would have checked the road conditions, and known it was bad. And she was grumpy. She was so mad. And it was so interesting too to just watch her process, because what she was mad at kept changing. Eventually it was us. She was mad at us. This was our fault because, she lives in this place that is far from her people. And, there's weather here. And, so somehow it became our fault that she couldn't go, and through it, I'm saying things like, as your mom, I would hope that you would not go because I love you and want you alive, right? This seems very risky to me. So I would hope that you would choose not to go, but I'm not telling her she can't go. She's 18. And, part of my MO too is to just not be the bad guy. I don't want, even though she's still trying to paint me in that place as the bad guy, right? I'm not imposing things on you. I can give you information, like that sort of parent as consultant idea. I really like. I will give you information. I'll help you think through different scenarios, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. You need to make that choice for yourself. Anyway, so she's going through this emotional, she's just angry, mostly blaming, and then I'm starting to see a little sadness, she starts to get sad. And in my mind, I'm thinking, she's adapting, right? She's starting to drop into those tears of sadness. Okay. And at about this point, I said, let's go for a drive. We'll get you some food. We'll check out the roads. And she was on board for that. And we took off in her vehicle. And she basically went straight to the freeway. And she got on, and like the slow lane was passable. And she's like, "Oh, this isn't too bad. I think I could still go." And I said, "Well, let's go a little further. We're very close to a mountain pass. Let's go up a little further, see what it's like in the mountains." And as soon as we started to enter the mountains, the roads were bad. And she said, "Oh, no, I can't do this. This isn't safe." And then she was fine. We got off on the next exit, turned around. She was like in a great mood the rest of the day, right? She was going through that grief process. She was bumping up against futility. She had to drop into her sadness. She had to radically accept what she could not change. And then she could let it go.
Yeah.
And have a good day. She ended up even choosing to hang out with me much of the rest of that day. We had some great connection time, but it was fascinating to kind of, again, be that observer instead of you getting caught up in her pain with her. You know what I mean? I could observe this process that I'd been learning about and going, "Oh, this is what it looks like." It's usually longer, right? It's usually more serious things, but it was just sort of a little mini example of the process of grief and futility and adaptation. And it was kind of beautiful, And I think as moms, we can kind of see, again, the mechanisms at work in our children's pain, then we can allow the pain. I think can be really hard, especially for enmeshed moms, to see their children in pain. But pain's part of life.
Yeah. Pain is just the weakness leaving your body. Yeah. To take
and developing, and it's also information. It's information.
Yeah.
What is this pain communicating to you? This is how our bodies communicate with us. So what does it need from you? What is it asking of you?
What is your client base? I'm assuming it's mostly moms?
It is mostly moms. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so I have my Substack. It's stoicmom.substack.com. And I say my audience is non-affirming, growth-oriented parents of trans-identified kids. Mm-hmm. And that's who I create content for. And that's typically who's in my coaching practice, but I'm starting to attract other parents who are just trying to navigate parenting in this weird time and place we inhabit, right? And the challenges of that, because I really do think, attachment plays so much into this, that our kids are, again, wired to uptake the culture. They have to figure out who they are in this world. And this is part of this world, and they're trying things on. And if you can find a way to not give this so much power, because, what you focus on expands. Yeah, that's another one of those coachy ideas. But if you are giving this so much energy, your kid's going to stay attached to it too. This is kind of how I see it. Model
Hmm.
letting go. Model letting go of something that's not serving you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You remember that movie with Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie from the Jim Henson Productions called Labyrinth?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't love it, but it's been
Okay.
a long time since I've seen it.
Well, the very
So,
last part, I'm recasting the movie as a an analogy or a fable about a girl wrestling with a trans identity, and David Bowie's the trans
mm.
identity. It kind of actually
Oh,
aligns because it's very
interesting.
transy.
Okay.
But at the very end,
Wow.
like David Bowie's like taking this baby, and Jennifer Conlon's trying to like save this baby,
Uh-huh.
like her soul or her
Yeah.
innocence.
Oh, I have to rewatch it. Yeah, I wasn't very good at metaphor before, but I'll watch it.
And
I'm into it now.
at the end, he's promising her the world and the universe,
Mm.
and and then she doesn't accept, and then he gets really mad and says, well, I'm going to destroy you. And she says something along the lines of like, you have no power over me, you have no.
Yeah,
She dispels that through an act of acceptance.
gives me
But
chills. I'll
yeah,
have to. Now I want to watch it again.
yeah, maybe I haven't watched it in forever, maybe it is pretty cheesy. But
Mm.
I had a question about we've been focusing on your experience, and from like epistemic positional theory, like it makes sense that we're talking about motherhood and daughterhood, and there's this dyad and this enmeshment that mothers have with their babies. There's the dyad, and then there's the dad, and the dad is kind
Mhm.
of like over here. So dads have a different relationship to attachment than mothers, generally
Mhm.
speaking. And so I'm wondering, from your experience, the dads who do connect with you, or the stories that the moms tell you about the dads, like how does the dad, well, what does the dad struggle with, generally speaking? Maybe we can just concentrate on the daughter, or like any advice or like kind of developmental arcs that you've seen specifically tailored to fatherhood and parenting from the dad point of view, which is, it's different. It's fundamentally different. I'm sorry to say, like sex
It
actually
is. Oh,
does
I agree with you. Yes,
exist. Yeah.
I'm
And
fully
we're
on
different.
board with
So,
that. Yeah. Yes, they have different attachment mechanisms. They do. They have to, right? That's how we function. And yes, it would seem usually it's the moms. Again, not always. I have seen it where it's the dad that takes more of this more enmeshed, invested role. But dad tends to be less invested in the research, right? They're not getting their PhDs in gender ideology. They're not interested.
yeah.
They're of course interested in their child, but it can often be, I think they don't give it as much power is kind of what I've seen. And moms can feel resentment about that. Why am
Okay.
I holding all of this and you're not helping me?
Yeah.
Where for the dad, it's like, I've got other things I'm thinking about, and, that's my focus is elsewhere. And I think there's also, though, an element of it's too painful and they don't process their emotions like the moms do either, right? It's
Yeah.
so painful for them, for some of them, that they just don't go there. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to pretend it's not happening. So I think there's also sometimes some denial. Not always. I think sometimes dad is just like, you know what? They kind of get that part of she's becoming an adult or he's becoming an adult. And we just need to let them work through what they need to work through to get there.
Yeah.
So I think it can be a combination of that or more one or the other, but
Yeah.
that tends to be what I see. Yeah.
This is a kind of a personal question, so answer it in a way that you feel safe about your family. But like how does a girl like become a boy and live with a dad who is a man? And like is that not kind of like strange? It's like, oh, I'm a man too. Like, does she compete with the dad? Like, or is this just like this kind of like disconnection between herself like and her father? Like, or is it a path perhaps of distinguishing herself from you and becoming closer to her dad in a way, in a weird kind of inefficient way?
I don't know that it goes to that level.
Yeah.
As far as I don't know like how much she thinks about that, because our home was not an affirming home. She's not, I don't think she lets the performance go when she's at home, if that makes sense. It's not like she's a girl, but she's not like posturing, and sometimes she uses the voice, right? You can tell when
Oh,
she's
really? Starts talking like a gangster or something, rapping like
Kind
Eminem.
of. A little bit. Yeah. Yeah. But I just don't know that she's taken it to that level in her
Okay. Yeah.
awareness of it, because
Yeah.
I have tried to kind of poke at that a little bit and lift that up and let her see, but she just doesn't take the bait.
It's just kind of a social construct. It's just so interesting because like men and
Right.
women are so different and
Yeah.
in so many different ways that to try to like emulate the other without knowing that you're putting on a performance, like either have to just kind of let it go and not stare at that and just kind of like, because it just doesn't actually add up and you can only accept so much like gray space in your life before it starts to either cause you problems or stress or just be too expensive to keep up that all that extra computational processing all the time on this stuff. So
Absolutely, which is why we don't talk much about it, because
okay.
I think the conversation she has with me brings all of that up for her,
Okay.
because of that, it pulls up that cognitive dissonance that she can't process through and doesn't want to. She's pretty angry with me right now. She's been pretty, we're going through a cold phase.
Yeah. How do
But I think
you,
it's hard to, oh, go ahead. It's hard for her to maintain it. I'm not very good at holding a grudge, and I think she's not either. She's got to really work at it. But I think she's planning to move too. And like in the next few weeks, she's probably
oh,
moving.
okay.
And I
So
think she's
anger
preparing for
and
that.
sadness. Yeah. Again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's individuating. She's got to push me away. And I'm a little, what I bring to those conversations, I think is too threatening, for her to, again, like I don't want to be the bad guy. And I think that's hard. I make it really hard for her to have that story. And so she's working hard to keep that story right now. She needs me to be the bad guy right now. And so she's putting in the effort.
And all you have to do is just be relaxed and present.
Yes, and supportive. I'm not supportive of the identity, but I'm supportive of her. And I just, it's really important to me to portray to her she can do this. She's got this. She's going to get a job. She's got roommates. She's going to be adulting here soon, and I believe in her. And I just want that to be really difficult for her to twist that story into something else, So, yeah. But stories are powerful.
So do you do these high-powered retreats now, or are you doing just individual work and then writing for a general audience?
So I do the writing. I've had people request retreats, and maybe next year. Retreats are a lot of work. Maybe I can figure out how to do them where they're not.
And are you working solo, or are you connected with these organizations that have popped up over the past couple of years?
Well, I'm a member of Geta.
Yes.
Right now, I'm a one-person show, so I do the Substack. I do a podcast, but it's not regular, right? It's more of just when I can find the right guests that I do the podcast. I really promise a different experience for people coming to the Stoic Mom Project. I don't want to feed into the divisiveness, right? So people who come to the Stoic Mom Project are looking for healing and, more inspirational messages, strategies for navigating in a healthy way, right? So,
yeah.
And I do also I have a mighty network for moms. And so there is a community. Mighty Networks is an online community platform.
Forum. Okay.
Yes. And so I also have, that's a paid, private, vetted community for moms.
Oh, okay.
So you have to fill out an application to become a member of that. And we do meet via Zoom monthly, and there are lots of resources in there. And it's a great group of moms. They're amazing. And they really support each other with this.
So you've gone through so much growth.
I like to think so. Yeah. I feel better.
How's your relationship to being a businesswoman now? as opposed
Oh,
to
it's
when
so
you're
different. It's so interesting. It's like,
what changed in your attitude or your position towards the work?
um, it's kind of, I love that parable of the farmer. I always forget what it's called. It might be called Maybe, Maybe Not. The farmer who, I forget which country it's from too, but basically he sends his son brings home a wild stallion. I think that's what happens. And the neighbors are like, "Oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. You've got this free horse, right? You're so lucky." And he's like, "Yeah, maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll see." Right. And so then the son goes to break the stallion. And while he's trying to break the stallion, he breaks his leg. And then the neighbors are like, "Oh, you're so unlucky. Your son broke his leg. That's so unlucky." And the farmer's like, maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll see. And then the next day, the military come to, um, to draft his son into the service, and his son can't go because of the broken leg. Right? They don't take him, and so again, like the neighbors are, "You're so lucky. You're so lucky." He's like, "Maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll see." Right? And this is life. And I had to go through all those really difficult learning experiences as an entrepreneur before. This time it was like, oh, I know how to do this. Look at me. You know what I mean? It's been very um, intuitive. It's just kind of flowed. You know what I mean? I feel like I just know what to do and how to pull things together and how to network in a way that has just really worked out. And I feel like the moms that are doing this work blow my mind. I'm just there to hold space for them, but they're doing the work, and it's really incredible to see the shifts and to witness their growth. Right? Like, yeah, it's beautiful. So,
You started out this conversation saying that you're optimistic, and I feel optimistic too.
yay, yay! There was a comment after my interview with Wider Lens. I saw it on YouTube, and it was basically, "This was so depressing. You shouldn't have even published this one." So it resonates with some people. It doesn't resonate with everybody, and that's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much. This is playful and
I like playful.
exploratory. I will link everything of your work down in the description and encourage people to check out your Substack, especially people who are looking for the resources that you are providing. And I wish you a lot of luck in your professional life. I think that you're onto something. You're fulfilling a great need, and the women who are involved in this work, and the men too, on the counseling and the supporting of the families specifically, are very, by and large, very great people. And that's the kind of person that's actually, helping people rather than fighting the culture war. And this will be published right after I publish something that'll be very culture war-y. Like, so they're connected, like this
Yeah,
ideology and what the doctors are doing and all that stuff, like, needs to be exposed. But like, this is the human.
absolutely. Absolutely. But I think I would say too, the culture is going through its own, I've heard this before and I kind of love it, its own adolescence, right? Like, another part of this that makes me optimistic, and I hate that there's so much collateral damage, but I think we are really being invited to look at how we're doing things and to figure out better ways that support that quality human experience. So I think that's what the kids are telling us. Things aren't working. It's time. It's time for some different ways of doing things. So,
Let's change.
yeah. Let's adapt. Yeah, let's adapt. Okay.
That's a great place to start.